Good morning on this Thursday morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion, and I'll tell you, the volatility, the bumpiness, it just continues and continues and continues. Yesterday, just a great example of that. That bumpy ride that we were on was pretty incredible yesterday, but it also was really interesting to see something that was going on for a while, and now it seems to have returned. That last 15, 30, 45 minutes of the trading session. As a matter of fact, yesterday, the last 45 minutes, the Dow dropped 240 points to finish the day down 340 points. So that was pretty significant. The same thing really happening when you look over at the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ trading actually reasonably okay for the majority of the day. It was down, but then it dropped about 140 points in that final hour, 45 minutes of the day to finish the day down close to 170 points to the downside. So that gives you a little bit of a, and by the way, we talk about this all the time, certain levels, and wow, we were clinging onto that 15,000 level pretty well for the NASDAQ. We're nowhere close to that level at this point in time after yesterday's beating, especially at the end of the day. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And the significant pullback that we've seen from the NASDAQ. That being said, the Russell actually yesterday, and I don't talk about it nearly enough, but my guys are always mentioning it to me, but the Russell yesterday was the leader to the downside percentage-wise. It was down 1.6%. So that was pretty significant move of the major indices that we look at each and every day. But crude still was gaining 86.50 yesterday. Pretty impressive move once again. You had gold actually on a nice run also, getting up towards highest levels in quite a while at 1840. And you had volatility. That was grazing as well. That actually was in a pretty interesting range yesterday. Call it close to 2180, 22, all the way up to 24. Matter of fact, the highest levels in about a month or so. It closed just beneath that at 2385 yesterday. So we did see some of that volatility actually stick, and we've been holding on now for at least a couple of sessions over that 20 level. Big volume yesterday. Nearly 46 million contracts, 45.7 million contracts yesterday. We did have the million contracts club yesterday as well, and it wasn't just one name. It wasn't just Apple. It was Apple, it was Tesla, it was Ford. And Ford has been more and more consistently this name that's been jumping up for quite some time. Matter of fact, we talked about this being a rebel stock. First of all, the volatile movement that it's made mostly to the upside, and with the volumes that we have seen as well connected up to that. So that's something that has really stood out. What really also stood out yesterday, what was really getting hammered to pull us down as much as we did yesterday? Well, consumer discretionary, financials, technology, semiconductors, all really were the pull. So that's why you were seeing such a dramatic move on both the Dow and the NASDAQ towards that latter part of the day. But not everything was terrible. We had some green yesterday. Procter & Gamble actually hung in there after their earnings. Dollar General looked pretty good yesterday as well. Believe it or not, a name that we talk about frequently here, and we've been talking about it since it was in the hundreds, but Peloton actually had a lift yesterday. So that was pretty impressive, actually bouncing a little bit at least off of some of those lows that were in the upper 20s and up about 5% yesterday. Lucid had a pretty reasonable day yesterday. Some of those Chinese names starting to show up a little bit more on the positive side. We had PDD, we had NetEase, those names all to the positive. But really, it was a day filled with selling yesterday. Some of those negatives, I'll tell you, some big moves. Ford being one of those, that was down about 8% yesterday. You had Boeing, Caterpillar in terms of influencing that Dow, both of those down about 3% yesterday. US Bank on the financial side, that was down significantly. I talked about that. Not so great for me as an owner of US Bank. Not happy to see it dropping down about 8%, but looking at that a little bit closer and trying to determine whether or not that was justified enough for that kind of a move or not. And that's something that if I make some changes there, I'll certainly let everybody know, whether it's here or on the halftime report, which I will be on tomorrow. Today, by the way, we've got the 15th anniversary of the Fast Money Show, 5 o'clock Eastern time. So that'll be pretty fun. Melissa Lee, I believe, is back and healthy and all that. So she's pretty excited about things. But that's later in the day. Moderna is another one of those names that was getting hit, those semiconductors. Now, it wasn't just one or two names that were getting sold off with the semiconductors yesterday, actually. There was quite a few names on that list. I'm looking at Lam Research, KLAC 10-Core. I look at Applied Materials, NVIDIA, Micron. You got the idea. A lot of selling. It wasn't just a couple of individual names. It was quite a few names. Tesla also a little bit of a bang to the downside. So today we got a little bounce, a nice bounce to the pre-market, up about 150 points on both the Dow and the NASDAQ. We've actually doubled that on the Dow side. We've been up well over 300 points on a couple of different occasions in this first hour, and kind of bouncing around somewhere between up to 60 and up about 300, maybe even a little bit more than that. The NASDAQ, on the other hand, kind of hanging around in that up about 200 club. We'll see. It obviously in this first hour, and we talk about this all the time, but boy, the last couple of weeks is exactly what we're talking about how you can have movement in the front hour and in the last hour of the day. And those movements can either coincide, or you can see completely opposite directional things that are moving. Airlines today, that was one of the big focal points. You heard from American. We see those, some of the numbers that were there, and a little bit of depression as far as a little bit of a press to the downside, at least early on, right after some of those earnings. Crude running again. We're getting closer and closer to that 87 level once again. We did have Tony Dwyer on yesterday. He's been a big energy guy along with me, and he was talking about maybe it's time for a little bit of a pause. Makes some sense. We talk about that all the time. Oftentimes that's very healthy, but we'll see. It's been an unbelievable ride so far, and like I say, today a little bit of a move up towards 87. Interestingly, although it's been a very, very plodding kind of a move. Interesting to say this though, you look over at all the different sectors, energy was the only sector in the red, at least early on, pre-markets and as we got into the start of the day. Technology kind of moving around a little bit. I was up about 1%. We started to see it move up a little bit more as we were watching that NASDAQ start to move to the upside. Communication services, that's been moving a little bit back and forth, but up a little more than 1%. Consumer discretionary as well started off about 0.75%. That started moving. As I mentioned, energy was down. It was down nearly 1%. Last I looked, it was flirting with positive territory there. I see a couple of the names that have actually been in the green this morning as well. And financials, a nice little bit of a gain, nice little bit of a bounce. They've been getting hammered a little bit as we've been kicking around in this earnings season. Looking at volatility, the volatility index closer towards that 22 level. It's down about 7% from yesterday's close. We'll see if that holds on, or if we start to see the bumpiness and velocity of the ride start to pick up, especially in that final hour. So a couple of names that were started off strong, Baker Hughes being one of those. Some of those Chinese names as well, really starting to take the lead in terms of the NASDAQ. You look at PDD, you look at Baidu, you look at JD, you look at NetEase, all of those names, positive territory. Trip.com is another one of those names. Microsoft as well as Salesforce, that helping out the Dow significantly, no doubt. Autodesk as well. But there is some weakness out there today. I know we sound like everything is great, but Ford got a downgrade as well, but Ford to the downside. I'm looking at Regions Financial, a little press, and some of those beta energy names, at least early on, there was a little bit of pressure on some of those names. We talk about that movement. They probably are starting to flip a little bit as energy started to flip a little bit as we've gotten closer and closer to 87 with crude. But at least early on, those beta names, the Occidentals and the Pioneers, those kinds of names were under some pressure. Semiconductors at least started off the day with a little bit of pressure on them as well. NXPI, Qualcomm, some of those names. So got two unusuals for you, and then we're out of here. So starting off, I mentioned gold had a little bit of a run of late. Well, interestingly enough, we got GDX hitting today. That's trading just underneath 33, 32.95. Got a buyer of 3,000 of not this week, but January 28th expiring calls. So get a little bit more time, obviously. And those are the 35.5 calls. So a little bit of a move expected there in a pretty short period of time. We'll see if that happens. Those were only 13 cents, but that definitely stood out, especially because of that move that we've seen in gold of late. Alcoa as well. Now, Alcoa, with a pretty significant move to the upside. I think stock was trading somewhere between, so call it somewhere closer towards that 63 level maybe, but we have April 65 calls. Now, this is a very interesting spread that we are seeing getting bought here. 6,500 of the 65 strike calls going all the way out to April. That's unusual in and of itself. Everything's been very, very short term. This is going out to April. Those were a pretty expensive option, about $5.50. They were hedging those against the 85 calls. So looking at a $20 spread, paying a little over $4 for that spread. But the primary option that we're talking about here is that buying side of those 65s, but getting a little bit of premium as well. Interesting to see that they made that large of a spread. I would have thought or expected something a little bit tighter, maybe instead of a $20 spread, maybe a $10 spread. But in any case, that was something that definitely stood out for me. I look at these materials all the time. We talk about Freeport, we talk about Alcoa, we talk about U.S. Steel, a lot of these various names. interesting to see this nice move out of Alcoa today. So that'll be something we'll be definitely watching very, very closely. By the way, I've jumped on a couple of these trades today already. I did jump on GDX. I did jump on AA as well. So we'll see how these play out. Very, very active early. We've got a lot of unusual options in this first hour. I'm sure it's going to explode even more. Some of the volumes that we have seen have really started to move in terms of the size of the trades that we're seeing in unusual. And we'll probably be talking about that tonight on the Fast Money Show as well. 5 o'clock Eastern time should be a lot of fun. Folks, have a great day of trading.